On a chilly Christmas night in 2007, the area outside of Phoenix, Arizona Mall played host to an unfathomable act of cruelty. A man was seen engulfed in flames outside a Subway restaurant as horrified bystanders rushed to call 911. That man was 36-year-old Aaron Taylor, a familiar homeless figure in the area who had just become the victim of a gruesome and senseless crime. Investigators are convinced they know who's responsible, but a lack of hard evidence and the silence of witnesses have kept the perpetrators out of the reach of justice. Aaron Taylor wasn't an anonymous drifter to those who worked near Paradise Valley Mall in Phoenix. Employees at the mall's eateries and shops knew him as a polite, friendly presence who often camped near the Subway restaurant on East Cactus Road. Aaron had come to Arizona from Oregon years earlier, and by all accounts was a gentle, considerate person who had a rough lot in life. Tragically, Aaron's final months were marked by torment. He had become the target of a group of local young men who took pleasure in bullying him as he tried to go about his life. Witnesses later told police that a trio of teens and young adults had been harassing Aaron for weeks before his death. These individuals lived in a nearby apartment complex, and they treated Aaron as a source of cruel entertainment. In the latter half of 2007, people saw Aaron being subjected to degrading quote-unquote pranks. In one instance, the criminals reportedly duct-taped Aaron to a bench in the mall courtyard, leaving him restrained and humiliated. On another occasion, they dragged him and threw him into a fountain for their amusement. A mall security guard even recalled seeing these men pouring liquids on Aaron and pushing him around in the months before the slaying. It was a pattern that grew increasingly violent over time, escalating with little intervention from bystanders or authorities. In Aaron's case, this pattern was a dire warning sign of the horror to come. While the harassment was known and widely witnessed, there was no sustained effort that successfully stopped the assaults. On the evening of December 25, 2007, while many families celebrated in warmth, Aaron Taylor settled in to sleep on his usual bench. It was a holiday evening like many others for him, cold and quiet, with a few passers-by and the glow of neon from nearby shops. Sometime that night, the same group who had been tormenting him decided to pay Aaron a visit. According to witness accounts pieced together later, 3 males approached Aaron in the courtyard as he rested. They brought drinks and snacks, perhaps trying to pretend they were in the Christmas spirit, or perhaps simply to toy with him. Several people saw the group chatting and sharing drinks with Aaron, almost as if they were hanging out casually. In fact, police would later find an assortment of items left behind: a half-empty bottle of whiskey, an unopened can of beer, and even a bag of Cheetos. It seemed the men were socializing with Aaron at first, perhaps lulling him into a sense of security. It turned out that this was just the setup for something unthinkably cruel. As darkness fell, what had appeared to be a quote-unquote friendly encounter turned into one of the most disturbing acts I've ever covered on this channel. Witnesses reported a horrifying sight. The young men began flicking lit matches at Aaron's long beard. When this sick game stopped being entertaining, they took things one step further. They doused Aaron in some sort of flammable liquid. Around 7 that night, a bystander saw flames erupting from the bench area and called 911 in alarm. In a matter of moments, Aaron was completely engulfed in fire. The attackers scattered, reportedly running off back toward their apartment, leaving Aaron to his horrific fate. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Mall security and a nearby convenience store clerk sprinted over and desperately tried to save Aaron, using their jackets to smother the flames that were consuming him. These good Samaritans fought frantically for several minutes, but the fire was too intense due to the flammable liquid Aaron had been doused with. When Phoenix Fire Department paramedics arrived, they found a harrowing sight. Aaron's body straddling the bench, still on fire. First responders extinguished the flames and rushed to perform CPR. They raced Aaron to the Maricopa County Burn Unit, but the injuries were catastrophic. He was officially pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. Later, the medical examiner's report confirmed the most chilling detail. Aaron had been alive throughout most of the ordeal, evidenced by soot in his airways from breathing in the smoke and flames. Aaron had been lit on fire and been forced to endure unimaginable horrors while fully conscious, for the amusement of 3 disturbed individuals who remained free. In the immediate aftermath, Phoenix police launched a full investigation, but they faced serious challenges from the start. The very act of attempting to save Aaron's life unfortunately destroyed much of the physical evidence at the scene. Firefighters had no choice but to douse the flames with water and foam, which inadvertently washed away potential forensic clues. Any traces like accelerant residue, blood, or fingerprints that might have been on Aaron's clothing or the bench were largely obliterated in the process of extinguishing the fire. Notably, while they recovered evidence, most of these items had been compromised by a mixture of heat, water, and foam. For instance, matchsticks that may have been used to ignite Aaron were too fire damaged to yield any DNA or fingerprints. Investigators scoured the area for surveillance footage, but frustratingly, none of the nearby shop's security cameras captured the secluded spot where it happened. The crime had effectively occurred in a blind spot with little forensic evidence. Eyewitness testimony became the crucial pillar of the investigation, since the physical evidence was lacking. And indeed, multiple people had seen parts of the incident or the events leading up to it. Several witnesses told police about the group of young men seen hanging around Aaron that night, providing descriptions of their actions. One witness specifically reported seeing the men laughing and flicking matches at Aaron shortly before the fire erupted. In the aftermath, someone came forward saying that one of the young men actually bragged afterward about the incident. All of these accounts painted a consistent and damning picture pointing to the same perpetrators. Crucially, people also noted that these were the same individuals who had been harassing Aaron for weeks prior. In the eyes of the Phoenix police, there was little mystery about who committed this sick act. The pattern of escalating attacks and eyewitness placements all pointed to those 3 young men as the culprits. While the police may have identified the likely perpetrators early on, turning that suspicion into an arrest proved daunting. A huge obstacle was the lack of cooperative witnesses willing to testify in court. Some bystanders who initially spoke to police grew hesitant to get further involved. It's been speculated that there may have been witness intimidation involved. When detectives brought in the 3 suspects for questioning, they hit a wall of silence. All 3 denied involvement, and as soon as police started pressing them with the witness accounts, the suspects lawyered up. According to the cops, the suspects' parents moved quickly to hire attorneys for their sons and advised them not to cooperate with investigators. With no confessions, no surveillance footage, no DNA, and only reluctant witnesses, the case stalled out. Prosecutors determined there just wasn't enough admissible evidence to confidently charge the suspects, even though the detectives strongly believed they had the right people. The prosecution only has one chance to pursue the case, so the idea that they would have taken it to trial without cooperative witnesses made the chances of success minimal. Also, of course, the lack of any usable forensic evidence posed a huge problem, especially since the witnesses stopped cooperating. The biggest mystery here isn't who did it, but rather how to finally hold the culprits accountable. Over the years, Phoenix detectives have revisited the case multiple times, hoping new evidence might surface, but as yet nothing has. In the end, it appears that the best chance for justice for Aaron Taylor will be if one of the men involved in the attack turns on the other two. Another potential possibility is if some very significantly degraded DNA can be reanalyzed to form a DNA profile. Even if only one individual can be tied to the crime, that's likely all that's needed. Using this method, the authorities may be able to put the full weight of the state on one individual and fully crack the case. Making a deal with one of the men may simply be the only way to realistically bring the other two to justice. Anyway, this case makes me absolutely sick. Hopefully these guys are caught and Aaron gets the justice he deserves. In the year 2000, at the bottom of the world, the remote Amundsen Scott Station, home to only a few dozen researchers, became the setting for one of Antarctica's most chilling mysteries. In May 2000, 32-year-old astrophysicist Rodney Marks collapsed and died under strange circumstances. More than 2 decades later, the question remains: was his poisoning a tragic accident or a disturbing crime carried out at the bottom of the world? Rodney Marks was an experienced Antarctic researcher working on a cutting-edge telescope project at the South Pole. He had his fiancée, Sonia Wolter, a maintenance specialist at the station, by his side. For Marks, Antarctica was almost a second home. He had wintered on the continent once before, and eagerly returned for this assignment. By all accounts, he was thriving in the harsh polar environment. He had close friends, meaningful work, and a wedding ahead. On May 11, 2000, during the long Antarctic winter, Marks returned from the observatory feeling ill. At first, he wondered if it was the usual strain of living at high altitudes in -80-degree darkness. But by early the next morning, it was clear something was wrong. Around 5:30 a.m. on May 12th, he woke up vomiting blood and in excruciating pain. He went to the station's medical clinic, where Dr. Robert Thompson tried to make sense of the baffling symptoms. Marks's joints and stomach burned, and his eyes were so sensitive he wore sunglasses despite the 24-hour night. Over that day, he returned to the doctor repeatedly as his condition deteriorated. He grew increasingly anxious and confused, even hyperventilating at one point, as the doctor struggled to find a cause. Baffled by the mysterious illness, Thompson even sought advice from other doctors via a satellite link, but nothing could save Marks in time. By that evening, Marks's condition had spiraled downward. After one last collapse, Dr. Thompson administered a sedative, which briefly calmed Marks. Moments later, he went into cardiac arrest, and at 6:45 that evening, he was declared deceased. The shock among the 49 people wintering at the South Pole was immense. A healthy young colleague was gone, and no one understood why. And because no plane could land during winter, his body couldn't be evacuated for months. In a horrific twist, the body had to be kept in a frozen storage room on site until flights could resume. During that time, no autopsy would be conducted. In late October 2000, after the months-long polar night ended, a plane finally evacuated Rodney Marks's body to New Zealand for autopsy. There, a forensic pathologist made a disturbing observation. Marks had died from acute methanol poisoning. About 150 milliliters of methanol, roughly a glassful, was found in his system. Methanol is a colorless, sweet alcohol used as a cleaning solvent, and even a small amount can be deadly. He had been poisoned by a substance no one would ingest on purpose. The revelation sent shockwaves through the polar science community. What had seemed a tragic medical mystery was now potentially a crime. By the time the poison was identified, 6 months had passed, and any evidence at the station was likely long gone. If someone had slipped methanol into his drink, the remote setting and delayed discovery gave the culprit a huge head start. if Marks somehow dosed himself accidentally, proving it would be just as difficult. Those who lived with him at the pole were left to wonder if one of their own was a perpetrator, or if a terrible mistake was to blame. An intentional act such as this at the South Pole would have potentially been unprecedented. There was a case in 1959 of a Soviet researcher striking a comrade in science with an ice climbing pick, but it's unclear if that attack was fatal or not. If it wasn't lethal, Rodney may have been the first known case of an intentional Antarctic slaying. The investigation fell to New Zealand authorities. The Amundsen Scott Station lies in Antarctica's Ross Dependency, a sector claimed by New Zealand, so a coroner in Christchurch opened an inquest into Marks's death. The coroner had to navigate Antarctica's legal gray zone, since New Zealand's territorial claim was not recognized by the United States. This meant he could only request help rather than compel it legally. The U.S. National Science Foundation and its contractor Raytheon Polar Services provided only limited cooperation. The coroner had difficulty obtaining records and interviews from the American-run base. He got the NSF to send questionnaires to all 49 people at the station, but only 13 responded. No physical evidence, like a tainted container, could be found so long after the fact. The NSF claimed to have done its own investigation, but released no findings to the New Zealand police. This lack of transparency strained U.S.-New Zealand relations and made it nearly impossible to reconstruct what happened. Marks's family, too, was frustrated by the lack of answers and communication from those in charge of the base. Ultimately, the investigation was closed in 2008, with the coroner's inquest remaining completely inconclusive. The coroner advised that on the basis of the limited evidence he could gather, it was almost certain that Marks didn't do it intentionally. The coroner thought the most likely cause was an intentional poisoning event, or accidental consumption on the part of Marks. More than 20 years later, the South Pole poisoning of Rodney Marks remains Antarctica's most perplexing cold case, by virtue of the fact that it's the only cold case on the continent. No culprit or definitive explanation has ever been found, and those who might know the truth have never spoken. On a Halloween night in a quiet Northern California suburb, a Placer County Sheriff's deputy noticed an abandoned Dodge Caravan on a roadside. Inside the vehicle was a scene out of a nightmare: the lifeless body of 39-year-old Sherilyn Hockley, a beloved fifth-grade teacher, lying in the back seat. The shocking discovery on October 31st, 1993, shattered the peace of Granite Bay and launched an investigation that has haunted the community for decades. Over 30 years later, Sherilyn's slaying remains unsolved. Sherilyn Hockley was a mother of 3 and an admired teacher who had recently moved to the Granite Bay area after a divorce. On Friday, October 29, 1993, her elementary school hosted Halloween festivities, and Sherilyn stayed late to clean up after the classroom party. She was last seen at the school sometime between 5 and 6 p.m. Sherilyn reportedly planned to head to her boyfriend's house that evening, but she never arrived. When Sherilyn didn't come home that night, her boyfriend grew alarmed. He drove to the school around 7:30 p.m. looking for her and even spoke with a janitor, but found no sign of Sherilyn or her van. As concern mounted, he contacted family and the authorities to report her missing. Her disappearance was entirely out of character. Sherilyn was reliable and deeply devoted to her family and her students. As the weekend passed with no word from her, family and friends feared the worst while clinging to hope. Their worst fears were confirmed on Halloween night. On October 31st, a sheriff's deputy on routine patrol noticed Sherilyn's blue Dodge minivan sitting oddly alongside Elmhurst Drive, just about a mile from the school. Numerous local residents had actually seen the van parked there throughout the weekend while attending kids' soccer games. Some assumed it was merely an abandoned vehicle, while others assumed someone may have been living in it. Either way, no one approached the van at that time. When the deputy stopped to check it out, he made a gruesome discovery. Cherylyn's body was in the back of the van. She was partially clothed and had been strangled with a ligature, left lifeless in her own vehicle. Detectives from the Placer County Sheriff's Office descended on the scene, trying to piece together what had happened to the well-liked teacher. The evidence painted a perplexing picture. Cherylyn had clearly been strangled, likely with a rope or cord, but that weapon wasn't found wrapped around her neck. Investigators recovered a piece of rope believed to be the weapon used in the attack, preserving it for forensic testing. Crucially, the crime didn't fit the pattern of a random attack. Cherylyn's purse, wallet, and personal belongings were still inside the van, untouched. Tests to determine if she had been subjected to an indecent assault came back negative as well. The location of the van and condition of the scene raised further questions. Detectives theorized that Cherylyn may not have been slain at the spot where the van was found. There were no signs of a struggle in that wooded roadside area, and no clear secondary crime scene was ever identified nearby. It seemed likely that the assailant subdued Cherylyn elsewhere, perhaps even in the school parking lot. He then drove her van to the quiet street where it was abandoned with her body inside. Investigators believe Cherylyn was slain on Friday evening, the 29th, or early the next morning, and the perp left the van in plain sight. It's believed that he had hoped it would blend in for some time until the body was discovered. Forensic teams combed over the vehicle for clues. They lifted fingerprints, but unfortunately, none of the prints matched any known person in law enforcement databases. No DNA profile was immediately obtained in 1993, as DNA testing was limited at the time, but evidence was carefully stored. The investigation faced a daunting challenge: a crime with no obvious motive, few physical leads, and a victim who by all accounts had no enemies. In any case like this, investigators start by looking at those closest to the victim. Cherylyn's recent personal life was scrutinized for clues. She had finalized a divorce earlier that year after a 15-year marriage, and her 3 children were living with their father in Chico, California after the split. Detectives interviewed her ex-husband and her current boyfriend, and both men were cooperative. After checking alibis and finding no evidence of involvement, police cleared the ex-husband and the boyfriend of any suspicion early on. Eliminating these 2 key figures was important, but it also meant the case had no obvious suspect to follow. Investigators cast a wider net. They looked into colleagues at the school and any other men in Cherylyn's life, but nothing pointed to a specific person with motive. The principal of her school noted that Cherylyn appeared to have a good personal life. In fact, colleagues recalled that on the day she disappeared, Cherylyn was in an upbeat mood, excited about the Halloween weekend, and enjoying time with her students. With those closest to Cherylyn yielding no leads, police pursued scenarios with strangers. One early tip involved reports of an unknown man seen hanging around the school parking lot in a Volkswagen on the day Cherylyn vanished. This raised suspicions of a possible stalker or would-be abductor. It's unclear whether this individual was ever tracked down, with some sources claiming he was cleared and others claiming he was never found. It appears to me that he was likely never found, since the cops released a forensic sketch based on the description of the man. Another avenue was the possibility of a serial offender. Just 2 years prior, in 1991, a woman named Cindy Wanner had been kidnapped and strangled in the same general area of Placer County. This case also remains unsolved to this day, but the cops were unable to find any connection between the two. Over time, two broad main theories about Cherylyn's case have emerged. Either she was slain by someone she knew in a personal crime of passion, or she was the victim of a random attack by an unknown predator. The prevailing theory, however, is that Cherylyn likely knew the perpetrator, given the lack of theft or other clear motivations for the crime. The only motive for the attack, based on the evidence as it exists, appears to have been ending the life of an innocent woman. Notably, in one quote from a 2015 interview, a detective working the case indicated that the name of the suspect was likely somewhere in the case file. Since it's an active and ongoing investigation, nothing further was said beyond this cryptic statement. Notably, it's not entirely clear whether the rope found at the scene has produced a DNA profile in the intervening years. It's also unclear if the rope found was even the weapon used in the commission of the crime, and again, given the status of the investigation, we don't have all the details. For now, the unsolved case of Cherylyn Hockley continues to haunt her family and investigators. Cherylyn's adult children are still advocating for justice, which definitely increases the chance that this case will be cracked eventually. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to help support my channel even further. On a calm February night in 1975, two young boys in Kofu, Japan stumbled upon something that defied explanation. As dusk fell, they watched a strange orange light dancing in the sky, a light that soon descended behind a vineyard, bringing them face to face with the unknown in their own backyard. What began as a playful outing would become one of Japan's most baffling close encounters, leaving a community grasping for answers. By the end of that night, the two children had experienced something that remains unexplained even today. On February 23, 1975, around 6:30 in the evening, two 7-year-old boys, Masato Kawano and Katsuhiro Yamahata, were roller skating in Kofu City. While they were enjoying the evening, they noticed not one but two glowing saucer-shaped objects hovering above. The UFOs emitted a glittering orange light and a strange ticking sound. As the boys watched in awe, one of the lights suddenly veered off toward a distant mountain, while the other descended into a nearby vineyard. Curious and alarmed, the children ran to the vineyard. Up close, they found a domed metallic craft about 20 feet wide and 7 feet tall, resting on 3 spindly legs. Strange symbols were etched along its silvery hull. As they hesitantly approached, a hatch opened and a small humanoid figure clambered down a ladder to the ground. The boys also glimpsed a second, smaller figure inside the craft's cockpit, watching from above. The being on the ground stood only about 4 feet tall, with long, thin arms, a large head, and a reflective silver suit that seemed to glow. Its skin was dark brown and deeply wrinkled, obscuring any eyes or nose on its face. Where a mouth should be, it had 3 shiny metal fang-like projections pointing down. The creature even had pointed bat-like ears jutting from its head. It moved slowly around the craft, seemingly unaware of the two stunned boys. Without warning, the humanoid turned and walked directly toward Katsuhiro. Before the boy could run, the entity placed a hand on his shoulder, patting him twice. It emitted an eerie warbling noise, a garbled sound unlike any human language they had ever heard. At that moment, Katsuhiro collapsed to the ground, paralyzed, whether from terror or some effect of the touch. Panicked, Masato grabbed his friend and they fled from the vineyard as fast as they could. Breathless and shaking, the boys burst into their homes and told their parents an incredible story of a flying saucer and its frightening occupant. Skeptical but concerned, the mothers accompanied the boys back to the vineyard. They arrived just in time to see an orange light pulsing among the grapevines, right at the spot the children had pointed out. Moments later, the light blinked rapidly and then shot straight up into the sky, vanishing with a flash. In the silence that followed, the adults found physical signs that something had been there. The wooden posts of 2 grapevines were snapped off at the base, seemingly knocked over by a heavy force. In the soil, there was a ring of small depressions, as if left by the craft's legs, and some reports noted unusual radiation readings in the ground. By the next day, word of the Kofu UFO was spreading through the town. Classmates, neighbors, and teachers all heard about the boys' encounter. The school principal and several teachers visited the site in daylight to investigate. They confirmed the uprooted posts and strange landing marks in the soil. The 2 boys were interviewed separately by parents, teachers, and even an investigator, but their accounts didn't waver. They described the same events each time and drew matching pictures of the saucer and creature. Another child, an 8-year-old boy from the area, came forward to say he saw a bright orange object flying in the sky around the same time, though he hadn't seen it land. This independent sighting added credibility to the story and suggested something unexplained was indeed in the skies over Kofu that evening. News of this eerie encounter quickly spread beyond Kofu, fueling excited newspaper headlines and prompting official attention. UFO enthusiasts believed the boys had a genuine close encounter with an extraterrestrial, citing the consistency of their story and the physical evidence at the site. On the other side, skeptics proposed more ordinary explanations. Some suggested the children had misidentified a known object. Notably, the Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau pointed out that a propeller airplane was flying in the area that evening, and its lights could have been what the boys saw. However, this explanation didn't directly account for the bizarre humanoid encounter on the ground. Others theorized that the story could have been a childhood fantasy or prank that gained a life of its own. Young kids do have vivid imaginations, and some believe Masato and Katsuhiro could have concocted an alien encounter story based on a TV show or comic book. That said, reports indicate that they were genuinely frightened and earnest about what they reported. Moreover, the broken posts and corroborating witnesses made it hard to dismiss the incident as pure make-believe. This has led to the theory that the encounter could have been a hoax perpetrated by adults on these kids. No evidence of a hoax ever surfaced, and the boys never retracted their account into adulthood. Without a definitive explanation, the Kofu incident remains an unsolved mystery. Some have even speculated about a secret military experiment or an unknown creature mistaken for an alien, but none of these ideas fits all the facts. The story of what happened in that vineyard in 1975 continues to intrigue and mystify people to this day.